Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Physical Manifestations of Anxiety and Stress Overload. I'm Georgia Weston. I'm the Executive Director of CHYP, Creative Healing for Youth in Pain. We're a nonprofit providing educational resources, exposure to creative healing experiences, and social support online. And today we'll be discussing how kids in pain can feel powerless and helpless, leading to an additional neurofeedback loop. That then happens between parents and kids, where the parents also begin to feel that sense of powerlessness. And in this state of parallel helplessness, the pain and anxiety both grow. Danielle Brooks will provide a step-by-step process on how to externalize the anxiety and pain from the neurofeedback loop for teens and kids to confront it and gain back a sense of say in their brains and bodies. We have a great discussion planned with your live Q&A questions. We would like to ask if everyone can please turn off their cameras and keep themselves muted so we can all enjoy without distractions. We would appreciate that, but we do encourage you to please type your questions into the Zoom chat throughout the discussion for our speakers to address. And now I am pleased to introduce CHYP's board member, Dana Pacholski, who will be moderating our conversation with our guest, Danielle Brooks. Dana also serves on the board of the UCLA Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital, is co-chair of the Regenerative Medicine Institute Campaign for Cedars-Sinai, the vice chair of Cedars-Sinai's Innovation Center Project for the Board of Governors, and is a board member for the Caton Children's Museum. Danielle Brooks, our guest for today, is based in Los Angeles. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist who has been in private practice for nearly 2 decades. She founded Brooks Marriage and Family Therapy, Inc. to create a comprehensive approach to family therapy and provide an in-house feel to treatment. This collaborative multi-therapist methodology has unlocked some of the stuck dynamics that exist between teens and parents, siblings, couples, and families. And now I will hand it over to Dana and Danielle to get our discussion started.
Thank you, Georgia. Welcome, Danielle. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course.
This is a really complicated subject matter of where does pain start? Where does anxiety start? When do they overlap? And I'm just so excited to have you join us today to walk us through what we can do and not do in order to help our children, and also what we as parents should be doing to facilitate a great platform for these kids to kind of break free from this pain anxiety cycle. So thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, happy to be here.
And I think what, in the interest of kind of an overlay of what we're going to cover today, if you can kind of walk us through how the pain starts and anxiety starts, does it really matter where it starts and how it starts, but what do we do from there? And then I know you're going to give us some great tools to help both ourselves. I think as parents, it's really important for us to find a place of comfort in this process too. So I'll let you jump in and walk us through all of that. I know you're going to give great tools today.
Okay. And at any point, if you need to stop me to clarify or ask specific questions, just jump in, interrupt me, and ask away. Obviously, this is a really hot topic because as parents, our number one job and responsibility is to make sure our kids physically feel great and feel safe first, right? And then emotional safety, and then everything else comes after that. So when kids get into a cycle of pain and anxiety, it can really kind of take over the whole family. It can take over the whole system. So I thought what may be helpful is to just give a little bit of insight into which kids and teens tend to be more susceptible to that loop of pain and anxiety. And again, we're not going to solve whether it's pain first or anxiety first. And honestly, it doesn't really matter because once it gets triggered, it just loops, which I'll explain in a moment. So what I've seen, mostly kids who tend to internalize, like really absorb, like almost think of a sponge, right? You pour water on it and it sucks everything in. So kids who are absorbers, internalizers, very emotionally perceptive a lot of times, but not very verbally, emotionally fluent. So they kind of absorb everything and don't even really understand how to express it, how to talk about it. And then kids who are externalizers, kids who have a lot of tantrums, kids who get really irritable and angry really easily, but again, have low verbal emotional fluency. And what I mean by verbal emotional fluency is someone's ability to say, I really feel frustrated with this homework right now. I don't really understand what my teacher is saying. Can you please help me? Right? Like, I'm going to use an I statement to express how I feel. I'm going to state what's going on, and then I'm going to find a way to try to work on the solution. So kids that really struggle with that pain anxiety loop tend to not be very high skilled at that verbal emotional fluency. So we'll talk a little bit today of what can parents do to really help kids learn that, because I think it's like the golden ticket out of the pain kind of anxiety loop. So that tends to be what I see the most, internalizers or just like ragers, externalizers. So that's really common. In terms of how I like to start, I think education is the most important, because when we feel pain in the body, we panic. And when our children are in pain, we panic. So how do we reorganize the response? So the way that I describe it to kids and even to parents, I make them do a fist. And this is very simple ways, right? Medical doctors can explain it a lot more detailed. But essentially, like, the limbic system inside of the brain is where you feel all of the emotions. And when you get an emotion, stress, worry, anxiety, fear, any feeling, the brain needs to do something with it. So it either sends it out the brain through the front. So I would say kids, like, through the front, like, I feel frustrated, I feel mad, I feel sad. Or if they don't do that, it sends it down the brainstem into the body, which leads to the headaches, stomach aches, non-epileptic seizures, all those body aches, fibromyalgia, like those types of feelings in the body. So what I really try to do is help kids understand that it's coming from up here in their brain, and they can either learn to get it out with words, or their body is naturally going to send it down, because the body's trying to say, hey, you got a feeling stuck in your brain you've got to deal with. If you don't find the word, your body's going to let you know that something is going on. So I start there, really working with parents and kids on helping them understand that piece, and then a loop starts. So like the feeling, it gets stuck there, goes down the brainstem, goes into the body then panics, sends it back up to the brain. The brain's like, uh-oh, I'm really in trouble. I have pain in my body, sends the anxiety back down, and then the loop just really starts. And you watch it escalate. It just starts to peak and peak and peak and peak and peak. The anxiety, the panic, the pain, etc. I don't know if that helps kind of just give a little bit of understanding of how I explain it to the kids so that they get educated on that loop.
And I think for the parents, because as parents, what's the first thing that a parent wants to do is fix. We want to fix. And that may not be at that point in the pain cycle the appropriate thing. Although I think if you could talk a little bit about, as parents, what do we do when we first see this? We want to make sure there's nothing physiologically wrong. But then how do we manage making sure there's nothing really wrong, going to the doctors, being prudent, and okay, this is your body sending to me signals? How do we parallel those so we can manage both at the same time?
So I think it's really important to always check the medical box first. So when families come to me where a child or teen is experiencing pain, I'm always looking at, do we check all of these boxes first? Because the last thing we would want to do is think that they're in that pain anxiety loop, and then we would miss something medical. So you have to do your due diligence and really check all of those boxes and work with someone who specializes in kind of going down the list medically to kind of, check things off the list. Then what we have to do is kind of move into the emotional space and make sure you create a team for the family. So you have a medical doctor that's well-versed in that pain anxiety loop. You have a psychiatrist and a therapist, and really trying to create a team approach can help take this kind of very panicky, anxiety-ridden experience and kind of contain it. We want to create very much a wholeness, kind of a container, right? Because that's the opposite of panic. Panic is all over the place. We really want to kind of contain it within a team that communicates a lot, that can help reassure the parents that we're going to get it all taken care of. So we start to, as a team, communicate to the parent in the way we want the parent to start communicating to the children. So you're asking, specifically, like when that pain gets triggered, right? And that panic starts, as parents, I mean, what happens when our kid falls and skins their knee? We go over there like, what happened? Let me see it. Let's clean it off, right? We get into action mode. And what happens is when we go into action mode with a child who's in the pain anxiety loop, the child is getting a mirror image coming back to them. They have a reason to panic, right? So their neurons are mirroring the parent's very concerned face, very panicked face, very rushed, like, well, let me try this, or is it that, or did you try this? And that just ups the child's internal anxiety without them really realizing it, again, because they're sponging all of that in, because all of our right brains are the emotional brains. They talk to one another. So even if a parent isn't saying that they're freaking out when their kid's in pain, if it's coming out through their body, the kid's still absorbing it. So a huge part of parents' response has to be learning how to respond versus react. So react is, what's happening? When did the pain start? How long has it lasted? What have you tried? And let's try this, let's try that. Like a really kind of like ER triage response, I call it, versus respond is like, oh, hey, I see that, you're feeling uncomfortable in your body. Like your body's trying to tell you something. We're going to figure it out. So even if they're really high in pain, our response is still down here because we're trying to mirror back to them. We need to bring it all the way, like an elevator. We have to kind of bring them back down that base floor. So we stay really away from how bad is the pain? How long has it lasted? What have you tried? All of the questions. We try to really stay away from questions.
So it sounds like when our children come to us and are in this, hey, like they finally gotten it out and they're like, we need help, or we have this pain or whatever, that's the time for us parents to kind of just take a deep breath and just wait a minute, because we really need to be the container for them to not match them and not fix them at that moment, even though we are going to we're going to get into fix it mode. We're going to do it in a very different way.
Correct. The parents really have to lead the charge in helping kids learn how to respond versus react. So the clinical team would teach the parents how to respond versus react. The parents then really start to model for the children how to respond versus react, right? Because we're trying to stop that panic from kicking in with that loop. And we definitely want to stay away from asking kids, how was your pain today? Or did you have any pain at school today? Or, hey, see, you went to the movies and had no pain. We really want to stay away from asking questions about the pain and leading them with conversations about the pain.
Well, that brings me back to kind of the whole CHYP mentality, which is, in creative healing for youth in pain, how do you get the brain out of the narrow lane that the pain has started to reduce the world into? And the parent's role is to say, oh, look over here. There's something over here today. Look over here. There's something over here. And the kids will typically say, I'm in pain. Don't you hear me, see me? At that point, what would you say for the parent? Because if our whole goal is to get them to get out of bed to the right instead of the left today, do something different than what they were doing in the pain cycle, how would you what would you do to help parents know how to do that? Because it's not a natural thing. We're all learning this. And I think we like to do things that's in our routine, even it's our pain routine. How do we break free as parents to help our children?
And I think it really helps, again, to focus on that first stage of education to make sure that the parent is really aware of when that happens, what's going on, so that they can keep their panic down and focus on responding versus reacting. And then being able to go to the child and kind of name it to tame it. So a neuropsychiatrist, Dan Siegel, he talks all about the incredible power in the brain of when you name it, you can tame it. So for a parent to come in and say, your body and brain are stuck in that cycle right now, right? Like we can name it, let's get your brain and body to kind of move on. We're going to go take a walk down the street, or let's go bake some cookies, or let's put some music on. So you can kind of start to teach, we can name what that is, and then we can try to just move through it versus having a big reaction to it. So that's usually what I tell parents to do, is say, looks like your brain and your body are stuck in that loop. Okay, let's go get some breakfast. It's almost like an afterthought.
And I'm smiling because I can hear the parents say, and my child will say, you don't hear me. I'm in pain right now. And what would you do at that moment?
And you say, I absolutely hear you. So remember what we learned about the pain loop anxiety cycle, that if we react to it, it gets worse. So we're responding to it instead. So you actually are very transparent in that moment with the child. Hey, remember, this is our game plan. This game plan will help. This game plan will be effective. We got to stick to the game plan. So I am hearing you and seeing you so much that I'm really sticking to the game plan. So it's you can be transparent with kids and explain it to them so that they understand you're not ignoring the pain, but actually rather the opposite. You're all in. You're all in to help break this cycle. You're just doing it in a way that's different than what their pain is asking you to do, right? So all that educational piece in the very beginning and getting kids and parents to really understand it is probably 50% of the journey, because they can keep referencing it back, right? So when kids are like, you're not listening to me, my stomach hurts so bad. I absolutely am listening to you. I'm listening to you loud and clear, which is why we're going to stick to this plan. We're going to figure this out. We're going to help your brain and body move through it. And I've got you. I'm going to help you. So we just don't focus on the, oh no, how bad is it? Or, oh, I'm so sorry, honey, or that sounds terrible. We don't want to go into that mode, because we want to move them towards that verbal emotional fluency, which we'll talk about in a few moments. Like, what do you then do in those moments to help kind of move from the agony, the physical pain, to kind of using verbalization to move out of it? So
that makes me think of the concept of somatization, and maybe we should touch a little bit on that before we get into the how to, because I think it's a concept that I don't think they teach early enough to parents and to kids, and that inner dialogue of, I have a stomach ache, so I'm going to get out of doing something. And that's such a subconscious thing that people do, and I don't think enough is talked about with that. If you could cover that a little bit of what that looks like, and when people bring up somatic behavior, what does that really mean?
yeah, I mean, again, and people have all different thoughts and theories behind this. And, my personal clinical experience is really along the lines of kids who are very emotionally fluent verbally from a very young age tend to not somaticize as much. And the kids who really struggle with expressing their feelings tend to have their body show it. And once their body shows it and they have a stomach ache and they got out of the soccer game they were nervous about, it just reinforces a behavioral response to an emotional feeling, right? So, and it's hard when kids are little, because again, we're in triage mode. They say they have a stomach ache. Okay, does this mean they have a stomach bug coming on? Does this mean they ate something weird? Are they feeling nervous? Like, we're going through this checklist of what it might be. So it takes some time in the early years to get a sense of who my child is and how they hold on to emotions. And that's why when they're really, really little, we want to spend a lot of time with teaching them how to say, I feel this, I feel that, and really work on that piece, because the body is going to hold the emotion if the brain doesn't get it out, because the body's going to want you to deal with something. So that comes up all the time. Missing
And the
school.
excuse to get out of something without even realizing that your body is presenting you with more pain in order to satisfy your need to avoid anxiety.
Correct. Right. I'm anxious to go to school because kids were leaving me out. And now I have a tummy ache and I wake up in the morning and I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to school. My stomach hurts. My stomach hurts. And they're not connecting, oh, I have a stomach pain because my brain is feeling anxiety that I'm not verbalizing. So it's sending it down into my stomach. And I don't realize that I'm trying to get out of going to school because I'm nervous about those friends today. I have a really bad tummy ache, right? And so what happens is, okay, then we have the kids stay home and we take care of the tummy ache. And without realizing it, after a couple of times, unintentionally, we just completely reinforce that the anxiety goes to the body, and then we support the body versus, okay, what's happening, what's going on, at school, how are you feeling, whatever it might be. So we have to really always make sure when we have physical pain in children that we spend kind of even way more time, again, working on that verbalization of their life, of their feelings, etc. Because they learn subconsciously that if I hold my body, in my pain in my body, my feelings in my body, and then I get out of doing things that are making me super uncomfortable, the body is going to start to create that pain to avoid situations that make them uncomfortable. It's not even a conscious thought. I mean, with some kids it might be, but it really rarely It really rarely is.
Well, and I think then that goes into, well, I've avoided that, which only the anxiety doesn't go away, it grows. So now you're
Correct.
further away from the very concept that gave you this cycle to begin with. And then what do you do? Because as parents, you're still feeding into, well, if you don't feel well, we better take care of your physical body, right? So this really is a very closely tied concept in the pain anxiety loop. And
Yeah.
I think if you could go back into, what I think is the most important thing of this is, if we can name it, we can tame it and
Yeah.
take it down that road. Because I think now that we've acknowledged that these two pieces, pain and anxiety, coexist and
Hmm.
feed each other, now what do we do? And as
Yeah.
parents, how do we help this? Naming it first, right? We've talked about that. But how
Yeah.
do we tame it? Now that we've avoided something, maybe let's talk about the parent that already let their child get out of something 1, 2, 3 times because they had the physical pain, and now
Hmm.
anxiety has kicked in, and that seems to be the predominant thing we're dealing with. How do you get them back to the thing that they were avoiding to begin with?
So you really start again with that education piece, not in the moment, not when your stomach is showing that, your child is showing that stomach ache, like out of the moment saying, you know what, something's going on. And we really need to figure out what is going on here. And let's really name it to tame it. Let's figure out where this is coming from. So out of the moment of pain or anxiety, you sit down, you have a really containing conversation and say, here's what our game plan is going to be to help resolve this, right? So you have to really start there. Then what you want to do is, outside of the moments when they're experiencing that pain and discomfort, is start to build their skill set. So these are just some tools. I think this is what you're asking about, Dana, is how do we start to tame it, right? So here are a couple of things that I recommend. The first is to start, and you explain this to your child. Outside of the pain moment, you say, here's our game plan. We are going to help your brain and body. They're stuck in this communication loop. We can help it. We can improve it. This can get better. So you have to really take charge. And you start to, I like to do it at nighttime, but essentially I call it like talk out loud journaling, right? So if they're 5, you can do it. If they're 12, you can do it. If they're 16, you can do it. And some kids like to light a candle or an imaginary candle, and you lay down next to them. What you say to them is, I'm going to just sit and listen. You can say anything you want. You won't be in trouble. I won't be mad at you. I'm not going to ask you questions, and I'm not going to hold anything against you. And the kids find it pretty funny. And then you just set a timer, and they just talk for 5 minutes. They might be really quiet. You don't then have your own anxiety jump in to say, well, what about this? Or why don't you tell me about school? Nope. You're going to start to parallel and show them we can sit through moments of discomfort and unknown and just kind of see maybe what happens to work on that distress tolerance. And kids will be really funny. They'll start to say, like, I took $3 out of your wallet and bought something in the vending machine. They'll kind of test it. And the parent's like, just kind of nods their head, and you just listen. And then eventually, over time, they start to say, Susie at school makes me feel terrible about myself and doesn't talk to me at lunch and pulls all my friends away. And the parent is sitting there, and all the parent wants to do is say, how long has this been going on? Why didn't you tell me? You can't. You have to it's like the child journaling, and you're just listening. You can also teach them by taking turns with that. You can do your own 5-minute journaling and very strategically model for them. I felt frustrated at work today when somebody wasn't listening to my words and made me feel not included in the conversation. Like, you can, as a parent, start to model what kinds of things can be shared. And so that nightly kind of 5-minute talk out loud journaling is one way out of the moment of pain to really start to build a skill set. Because again, how we help the moments where they're in pain is actually working harder out of the moments of pain to then reduce those moments of pain. So the talk out loud journaling is great. They can also write in a journal too, but there's something with the parent hearing it and building that trust that they're not going to jump in and respond. The second thing you can do, I make little worksheets and I put at the top probably 6 or 7 feelings: worry, scared, confused, overwhelmed, whatever, happy. excited, a bunch of feelings. And then there are 3 sentences. I felt blank when blank. And everyone in the family gets one and everybody fills it out. So again, you're starting to model how to kind of express your feelings, and whatever the child writes down, you don't go into deep questions about it, because what that's going to do is make the child feel backed up against the wall of whatever I write, I'm now going to get, investigated on. So that's another tool that can be used. There's also, you can search for, on YouTube, there'll be little short videos of kids talking about their feelings in a really age appropriate and healthy way. So that's the social learning theory, right? You watch somebody else your age do it. There are podcasts where kids do that, where they talk about things that stress them out and how they take deep breaths so they can listen to that. Meditation is huge. I am a believer in the 5 minutes a day, because you're trying to rewire that amygdala, that emotional thermostat in the brain. So these are just a variety of tools, and parents should be actively working to model verbal fluency, emotional fluency throughout the day. Like just randomly, like if you're in the kitchen cooking, like, oh, that was really frustrating, I couldn't get that jar open. Oh, well, it'll just take me a moment. Like you do this verbalization of what we're trying to get their brains and bodies to start to do, because once they're able to do that, the pain can usually come down quite a bit. So those are just a couple of tools that we use to work on that verbal emotional fluency.
As you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, as a parent myself, I learn the most, right? Our kids are the greatest mirror. And I'm thinking to myself, really? Because when we burn ourselves, what are we doing? We're tossing something, right? And here we are saying, okay, now we've got to hold this container. We're going to verbalize the very things. It's a great thing for parents too, to go through this, because we subconsciously do so much in front of our kids that we have no idea. Now you're saying, okay, parents, let's be present. You have a modeling opportunity whenever you're in front of your children to help them see something different. And again, if they've only wanted to see this narrow playing field, our whole goal is to give them a bigger playing field. And another thing I was thinking about was, with the CHYP community, we've had many kids that have been bedridden, where parents get to this place where if I don't save them, they're going to miss this year, and then their entire academic career is over, and that mindset. And so I would really like to go back and help parents in this moment, if you could help us, because I know from a lot of parents I've talked to, well, they're going to miss their junior year. They're not going to get into college. And that thinking is some of the hardest thing to retrain a parent to say, actually, if you back up and step over here on the sideline and take a new approach, there's a better chance your child will get out of bed. And we've seen many of our CHYP kids that were bedridden get out of bed when you think they're never going to get through high school. And not only get through high school some way, because now there's online learning and it's acceptable in so many ways. And we're now seeing these kids that didn't think they wanted to go on in life, go to college and doing dances and things. And so I think if we can go back to the parent piece for a minute and say, okay, and let's look at teenagers, because I think the little kids may be a little easier for parents to think of these other tools that you've mentioned. But let's talk about the teenage kid who acts defiant. You think it's over. You don't know what to do. You're in a world of hurt, thinking that you aren't effective. And yet we know parents actually can be the most effective thing to crack this egg. It's hard shell.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is really important, which is all the anxiety the parent is then holding, which, by the way, so is the teenager. They just might not be saying it. They might not, or maybe they are. They might, not be saying, what is this going to mean for my future? And am I always going to be stuck in bed, right? But the parent, day after day, is thinking, oh no, they're never going to be able to function in life. Like, they're missing out on all these things. They're not going to socially mature. They're not going to be able to go off to college with everybody else. They're going to feel behind. And you just spin and spin and spin and spin. And again, like, the emotional space, even if you're only thinking it, your teenager's brain is absorbing that. So you have to really, before you go into the room with the teenager, take a moment and say to yourself, okay, what is my game plan right now? What is my strategy? And make sure then separately you get support therapeutically to deal with all of the anxiety and the worry about the future, and try to then work on all I'm doing right now is going into this room to pay attention to how I talk to my child. The future is the future, but how I handle myself right now is going to make a big difference for tomorrow or the day after. So really coming back to the present moment accountability and parents need a lot of support for this. It is brutal. It is so hard to watch your child, your teenager, stuck in that way and feel like they're missing out on their life. It is a horrible feeling. But trying to make sure parents have the support to understand, the more afraid they are of the future and what their child is missing, the more anxiety they bring into the room, which the child then absorbs, which reinforces the pain in the bed. So it's hard. By no means do I think this is an easy thing to manage, which is why support is so important. A lot of times when I work with parents, depending on the scenario or situation, I'm doing like 10-minute a day coaching, right? Via text or phone, just to kind of remember the game plan. Let's get back to the game plan. Let's focus on our response versus react. Tell me all your anxiety. I'll hold it for you. Okay, I'm holding it. Now I want you to take a deep breath, go in the room. What's your plan? So parents need just as much support, maybe if not more, to be honest. So I really think staying in the moment and learning how to not panic, not go into like, you have to get out of bed. Like you've missed school 5 times. You have to get out. You're going to miss English. You're going to fail English. That will just bought you another 7 days in bed.
For sure.
And again, I know it's so hard. By no means am I trying to be flippant and think that it's easy. But again, game plan, like really understanding the name entertainment. Like, okay, they're in that pain loop. Okay, like we have to get in this moment right now. And kind of like, here's some food if you want it. Here's some water if you feel like getting hydrated. Let me know if you need anything. Happy to support you and help. We just back all the way up from a teenager. The more we're on the teenager, whew, the more their brain doubles and triples down. And with a teenager, you definitely don't want to point out when they're out of their moment of pain. Hey, look, you got up today and you did A, B, and C. Most of the teenagers will say, well, but I felt terrible doing it, right? Because the teenage adolescent brain is in this stage of development where it doesn't really want to be told by an adult what's happening. And an adolescent brain believes that if they agree with you, it means they're invalidating everything else they said. So the adolescent brain is like, no, I don't want to say I feel a little bit better, because then that means the 3 days I felt terrible weren't so bad. So you really want to stay away from the pep talks or pointing out the exceptions with a teenager. Kids are different, but with a teenager, they will double and triple down. And then you get really frustrated because like, but I was just trying to point it out. And the teenager's like, well, you don't understand me. You don't get it. That's the response that we tend to get. So it's just kind of, we just back all the way up. You know, oh, hope you had a nice walk.
Dance. It's such a fine dance, right? Because here you are saying, and this is, we know this to be true. And I think I really want to reiterate this to everybody listening today and whoever's going to listen to this in the future, that this is not something that we're just looking in books and reading about. This is tried and true things that we know. We've seen kids that have been bedridden for 2-3 years that have said, let pain take over, that get up, completely normalize, and are living on their own at college. So these are concepts that we know are proven to help rewire the brain when it's gotten in these sticky neural loops. And so taking that concept and going back, okay, we've got this teenager, we don't want to acknowledge anything, we're doing this fine dance, we're going to put food out and we're going to know that they're going to go eat it when they're ready. That's such a hard concept for a parent to not want to parent in that moment. And yet I heard you say that, and I know it from everything I've learned from Dr. Zeltzer and all these teams with CHYP, is for a parent to just take a moment and know it can be okay. That forcing the fix is actually perpetuating the problem. And so I know that there are parents out there who say, okay, well, my kid's getting behind in school, I'm going to read to them. And they're not going to eat, so I'm going to put the food out. But I think what you're saying is, it's okay, put the food out and back up. Don't read to them because we're not letting their brain do their part to get themselves out. We're actually keeping them in bed. We're actually feeding the monster at this point, correct?
Yes. And again, it's not easy. It is, you know, parents want to like walk in the room and say, get up, get up, get up. Like, what are you doing? Like or come in like so sweet, like, honey, it's going to be okay. And honey, I know you can do this. And honey, just put your shoes on. And again, either one of those approaches don't help the teenager move out of it, which is why I think the parent getting a ton of support, maybe from other parents who've already been through it, that can say, it is going to be okay. They are going to get through this. They are going to get their life back. They are going to get caught up on academics. You need that support letting you know, because otherwise your whole brain as a parent is going in there in panic mode and worry mode. And I like to talk about it like you back out of the space as the parent with the teenager in pain, and you just drop little seeds. Oh, your food's here. You know, have it whenever you want or not. There's some water for you if you want it. Might be a good idea to touch base with your teachers via email. Let me know if you need any help. But then you don't ask again, did you email your teachers? You just kind of plant. I know.
That right there is the hardest
part. I know, because what happens is the parents thinking they didn't email the teachers. Now the teachers are going to think this, and they're going to fail them. And if they fail them, then they can't go to the next grade. And if they don't go to the next, it's just right? Again, so understandable. So really holding confidence with getting a lot of support and containment from a team and other parents who've gone through it. You're just backing all the way up from a teenager and just letting them know you're available to support and help, and for them just to let you know. And so it's kind of like, if you need any help reaching your teachers today, just let me know, happy to help. Versus, did you email your teacher? Do you need to follow up with your English teacher? What? All of that is going to rev the anxiety in the limbic system, send it down into the body, reinforce the pain. So we have to really understand how to respond versus react. And again, with teenagers, even more so. I mean, we know this with teenagers, right? Like you could say 20 sentences and they'll hold on to like the one of the sentences that you said. And you're like, wait, what about the other 19? That's what their brains really do. So support from other parents who understand this approach and know it will work and that the future is not all blown up is key. It really is.
And I think, again, looking at the brain, I mean, we parent from a physical body, emotional body, but we forget to parent from brain development. And that was a great gift that I got by a doctor a long time ago who taught me about parent to getting my child to think for themselves, not being a frontal lobe surrogate where we answer the questions for our children. So much of the time, parents, you start to see this once you've been aware of this in a lot of the population where parents are asking their kids a question and then answering the question, right? We're not letting our children's brain do the normal maturation because as parents, we want to help them, we love them, and we think we're doing the right thing. And yet we're not letting those neurons fire and connect the different parts of the brain that only connect when they're using their own brain in a new way, not just the old way, but we want them the new way, correct?
Yes. And so it's like dropping little seeds, right? And then backing all the way up and then dealing with your anxiety separately to not crowd that space. So that it might be like, you might want to think about, or, let me know if you need any help on what you would like to do with your teachers today. Or, the doctor suggested maybe doing some body work. Let me know if you need any help with that. So you're just dropping it in and then you're out. Right? You have to leave the space for them to sit and start to decide, I can do something right now. I can talk myself through this, right? Versus the I can't, or I won't, or I'm unable to. So we just kind of drop those seeds in with teenagers. And I'm probably a little bit biased, but who the teenager is working with as a therapist, they have to really dig their therapist. They have to really, really like their therapist. They have to feel like it's their person, and that they feel like the therapist is not there to convince them to get out of bed. They can't feel like it's another adult trying to solve the problem of getting them out of bed. So that person's really important for that teenager, like really important for that teenager. And usually what I kind of like to do is also work with the parents and help and have the teenager know I'm working with the parents, and then work with the teenager on like, what do you want your parents to do differently? Like really, because again, getting them to speak up, getting them to say what they need, and then kind of working with the parents on that piece too. So I think you're right on the money with the piece of you've got to back up enough. They have to start thinking and doing, but getting the panic out of that is really important.
So we have the parents now coming
Yeah.
to an awareness of, if I really want to help my child, doing things for them is actually not part of the solution. It's part of keeping them in that role. And if we want to get them out, so let's talk about the anxiety. So the child now has the anxiety that's peaked. They're really behind at school and they feel like they're going to fail everything. And one of the questions is, because they're constantly feeling behind school, they're really stuck in that loop. And where do you jump into that loop to help them get a new lane?
Yeah. Okay, so this is one where I think being an active supporter is really important with parents, because that is a loop, which is I've now missed school, so I'm now behind. I now have all these unfinished assignments and my grades have dropped. Or socially, I haven't been there and now I'm behind. And so even if they start to feel a little bit better in their body, they're getting that signal coming back down of anxiety, right? So this is where I think being very proactive on working with schools is essential. I think it is super important to be an advocate. And if a lot of times I'll say to the kids, if I can wave a magic wand and make something of this substantially better, what would it be? And almost all of them say, all of my unfinished assignments just being wiped away. So I'll say, okay, let's see what we can do. So working with the school, so let's say they have 20 missing math assignments, how about they have 5? And I have found majority of the time that schools are very workable. They're very, because they want the student there. So we do look to be very involved in how to make adjustments to their academic plan. And I usually write like a 504 plan, which is an emotional support plan, and and get right to that. I'm so glad that somebody asked about that. It is essential to do immediately, because for sure that'll layer things on, especially for the teenager. So you want to get very active in that.
Well, and just like retraining the brain, we're also retraining the schoolwork. And if you've missed a ton and you see a mountain ahead of you at school, we have to kind of chunk it in little pieces and say, let's get these 2 done. Let's get this 1 done. And then I can hear a child saying, well, that's not what I need to do. I need 10. And say, but we have to start someplace. And where do you tell the child how to get into that? Don't worry about the 10. Let's focus on 1, 2.
Yeah. So again, really helping them understand that any step of action only moves them forward. Any step of inaction only keeps them stuck or moves them backward. So any step, 5 problems out of 10, 5 problems done. And really, again, working on the name it to tame it, which is action will help and action will keep you stuck. So you have to really have that game plan and say that piece to them. So a lot of times there's a big chunk from school. So if we can whittle it down to this, right? And then say to the child, here's some options. I say, like on a platter, I'm going to give you some options, pick, make an active choice. So we can plan out 1 assignment a day. We can plan out 2 20 minutes every day. We can put it on your nightstand, and when you feel up to it, you can grab one. Like, you just kind of give them a bunch of options and say, but we need to choose one. So they're making the choice on what it is, but then constantly reassuring them that they will get caught up, that the school is being supportive, they will figure it out. Like, you have to just keep pounding that over and over and over and over again. And I do think it's important for schools to massively reduce the outstanding work. I really do. I think expecting a child who's in bed to have 9 essays to read, we just can't. That's not, they're not going to feel like they can get out of that. So I work a lot with schools where they have like 9 missing essays and say, like, let's do one essay and wipe the others away. So I do think that that's very important.
But even getting 1 essay done has used your brain again in a way that you had shut it down and opened it back up. So now you've done 1 essay. The chances of you getting your child to do anything else from there goes up.
Right. And with teenagers, you have to be careful. With kids, if you make a really big deal of the 1 essay being done, so you have to be really careful of, like, great, let's check that off. Okay, let me know when you're ready for the next one. I'm here and available. You can't do like, don't you feel better? And doesn't that take a big amount of weight off your chest? Because again, it's it's too much. We have to like keep the reaction down, even in positive, right? And just kind of come up with the game plan. And I have found that when it's a teacher or a therapist or a tutor coming up with the action steps, teenagers and kids tend to get more done than if it's the parent sitting down trying to have them get caught up, right? Because there's that entanglement that's there.
Well, and I think really the takeaway from this piece of it is, as a parent, again, we are simply going to be a container for a little while. And we really shouldn't be the cheerleader.
Correct.
Because that's going to cause the teenage brain to kick in the adversarial piece, when we're trying to get the teenage brain to say, wow, I didn't even look over there, and now I'm over here. I got out of bed. I walked a mile, didn't even pay attention to it.
Right.
And we always talk about that parenting kids with anxiety and pain really is a dimmer. It's this tiny little itty bitty minute turn that one day you've got the light on, but you didn't see it coming. And I so often hear from parents, well, I did that and it didn't work. And I'll say, try it again, because you're just trying to move the dial a little bit. And before you know it, the dial moved all the way. But if you're looking for the switch, that's not how this works. The road back is a really fine dimmer.
And I think the way that I educate parents on that piece is, you remember when you have a baby, right? And the baby's really crying. And so you go over to sit in the rocker and you sit down for a couple of seconds and you're rocking, the baby doesn't stop crying. So you get up and you like move them to the window to try to get them to look outside. Baby's still crying. So then you move over to, bounce them around while you're standing up. Baby's still crying. But if you just stayed in the rocker for several minutes and tolerated the baby crying and just soothed and comforted and just stayed, the brain would be like, oh, I'm catching on here. Oh, okay. But we tend to move on when our kids are distressed so quickly to the next thing to see if it will soothe them. We got to leave space for their brain to like catch on, right? You got to just, and so much of this is the parents managing their anxiety, which is brutal, working closely with the schools, having a really good support team to like help contain them so that they can contain their child. But yeah, leaving space for it to settle in and work. And it does move. It's a smidge by a smidge. It can be so simple as like one day they pick up the water and drink the water. Again, you don't want to say, oh, you drank your water, great. Like, you just refill it. Like, you have to be with teenagers, even children, like you just refill it.
And this is a really hard concept, but it's so important.
So hard.
And as parents, we're going to learn a lot through this lecture about how we have to change some of the things we do that we don't even know we're doing. But one of the biggest issues is the stigma of seeking help. So many families are really stuck before the place of being able to get help, whether it's cultural, whether it's perception, what if it's fear, whatever it is. What do you do? How do you help I guess is a multi-level question, right? How do you address that? What do you do for the kids? And if you can't get outside help, what do you recommend? Because if there is a cultural barrier to seeking help.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times you start as a pediatrician, right? I would say most of the time that's like the first stop. And I do think a lot more pediatricians are getting, at least in my experience, better versed at grasping and understanding the degree of emotionality and how that affects pain. So I think a lot of it is you start medical, and the hope is that the medical team will eventually get to the place of being able to say, hey, it's really not physical. It really is emotionally driven. And once I feel like that happens, at least what I've seen, is then parents move into, oh, because when you're over here, you're first trying to check everything off the list. So I think doing the medical due diligence within a community, within a culture, is the first way to start. And then once someone does say this is all emotional, then I think, again, there are so many resources that are available, whether it's CHYP, whether it's, different families, forums, Facebook groups, you name it. This is out there a lot. Families are really suffering, stuck in this dynamic. So I think the more they expose themselves to understanding that you cannot get through this alone, it is just such a big ask, that looking for those resources in the community is going to be their way out of their child's pain. I mean, I think we just really have to reinforce that and highlight that, and find the right people. And there are lots of people available out there, you know,
Well, and thanks to doctors like you joining us today, where we're able to record this. This will be on YouTube, and families that may have been reluctant, or one partner may have been reluctant to say yes to seeking outside help, you can still gain the knowledge through groups like CHYP, where we really teach you to parent to the brain, and then
Yeah.
the body will follow.
Yeah.
And with some of the wording that you've given us today, it's really important, because I mean, I'm laughing because I know how many times I've been like, let's go fix it. You're in pain. We got to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
And you have to step back. It's doctors like you that teach us to say, hold on. Is that in the best interest of your child at the moment, to jump into fix it mode? Or am I supposed to go back to reminding myself that I learned on a YouTube video like this? I'm the bucket.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for people that really aren't familiar? What's the bucket? Is that's just holding the space so that the child can bounce around and we don't mirror it, like you said.
Right. Yeah. And again, I think that you always do your medical due diligence, check it off the list. And then once you've done that, then you really need to shift to looking and treating it from the emotionality of the brain. Like, you really have to click into that mode and accept, right? I think a huge part of that is the acceptance piece of like, oh no, there really isn't something that's creating that pain in the body. This is coming from emotions in the brain. And I think the acceptance of that is like the first step, right? That education piece of like, oh, this is actually coming from the brain. This is coming from emotions stuck in the brain that they don't know how to get out, that the body is then absorbing and communicating, right? So the body is a tool of communication. It's how it, you know, and so sometimes it's the teenager in bed who can't get out, is their body is communicating to us that they're emotionally suffering and don't even maybe realize it. So I think that first step is really checking the boxes medically, and then accepting, oh, this is coming from emotion. And now I got to shift my mindset and hyper focus on what is my role as a parent, not where's the Band-Aid to fix the knee, right? What's my game plan for helping rewire the emotional dynamic in their brain? That's the shift. It's not easy, but that's why support is, I would say, beyond crucial, essential.
Well, and again, it really doesn't matter whether it was the stomach ache that came first or the anxiety. Once you are in this pattern and this loop of pain body, emotion body, communicating louder than what your body can handle, you really have to do this parallel path. Because while you're going to the doctor, if you're not paying attention to this, everything you've taught us today, even while you're going to the doctor to check those boxes, as parents, we might be pouring salt into wounds that we are not even aware of. So now that we've had these experiences where we've learned from you and Dr. Zeltzer and all the other doctors about what does the brain do, we can parent differently on the way to the doctor. You know, I mean, I know a handful of parents that have called me and said, my child is in too much pain to get out of the car and go to the doctor that they wanted to go to. And I lost it. As a parent, I just lost it. But at the end of this lecture, if our takeaway is just stay calm. If you miss the doctor, there's gonna be
you sit in a car and you just say, we'll just sit. You let me know when your brain and body are ready to get out and go in. And you text the doctor or call the doctor or step out of the car and say, we're a little bit stuck and we'll be in when we can be in. And then again, you have to go as a parent into complete regulation mode, because that's what we have to mirror to teach them, with like deep breathing inside your brain and body, saying at some point today, we'll get into that doctor. We will. We might sit here for 2 hours. We might sit here for 20 minutes. My kid might get louder, but I got to just wait it out. I got to just wait it out. And the more you stay regulated in that moment and talking yourself through it, creates a parallel process for the child to start to observe and learn that they can calm themselves down and eventually move through it. What happens is the kids like that in the car, which is such a good example, the parents escalating and escalating and escalating and escalating and escalating. There's no way that child is going to regulate, open the door. No consequence, no threat, no screaming, no begging, no crying. The child's not going to all of a sudden be like, okay, I feel good enough to get out of the car, right? You have to calm all the way down, stay all the way out of that space, so the child can eventually work through that and decide to get out of the car. So that's the empowering piece of it, right? Pain, you feel powerless, you feel weak, you feel helpless. By backing up and allowing the child to make that decision to get out of the car was a win for their brain to say, I can, or I will, or I am, right? So that whole shift in that power dynamic, which is something we could talk about in a lot of detail on another day. That's a whole other layer and level of this too.
But it's important also. I mean, these are such important concepts. And as you're saying this, I'm thinking, wow, as a parent, where do we go? We go into the doctor's office and think we forget about our child in pain in a moment. And as parents, we go, oh, the doctor's going to be waiting for us. So we create our own stress, which then is not a bucket for the kids. We are not mirroring good things. And we are actually creating more problems for them to not get out of their car, out of the car and go in. So we have to remember the child has to come first in that moment. They're not trying to be manipulative, right? Because that's the first line is, oh, they're trying to manipulate this again. It's not about that. And I think that as, you know, we're getting close to our hour and we probably feel like we're just getting started. You know, I really want to recap the brain real quick. And that because if parents get anything today, it's understanding the adolescent brain development, and parenting to pain. So I want to just say something I say all the time on these CHYP lectures, which is what Dr. Zeltzer has taught us, which is when kids get stuck in a pain loop, they're sending louder signals in pain and pain and pain. And then their world gets narrower and narrower. They only want to do what feels comfortable, but only what feels comfortable is getting really narrow. And that this entire lecture has been about how do we get out of that lane that is the comfort lane, even though they're in terrible pain or perceived pain or anxiety, whatever the lane is, the best thing we can do is help them to broaden their experiences. And if you want to give us like a good closing statement on that, I think it's the best takeaway we can give anybody, because you can fill in the blanks from there.
Yeah, I would basically say that your greatest tool and asset will be out of the moment of pain is building that skill set emotionally, right? So really focusing on out of the pain moment, get to work. It's the flip, because we think in the pain moments, we have to get to work. In the pain moments, we need to back up and stay regulated. And out of the pain moments, we go to all those unique creative tools, right? All those creative tools of getting a sense of what's happening with my child, what's happening with my child's life, how are they processing, how are they feeling, how are they thinking, how are they experiencing life. That's where the meat is to get the pain to go down. All of it's like you have to kind of go from here to over here. You have to turn your focus.
Well, I mean, this, again, I feel like we're just getting started and there's so many things. Thank you so much for your time. We know how solid your schedule is. And thank you for everybody who joined us today, because this is really important things. So these tools are really tried and true. And we've seen them really help kids get out of bed, especially some of our sickest kids that you thought would never do it. Like I've said before, we've seen them do it through CHYP. So thank you, Danielle. And thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Georgia, if you have anything you want to let us know about coming up?
I just definitely want to echo everything that you said. This was such an informative presentation, both Dana and Danielle. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for joining us today and sharing your questions. This concludes our physical manifestations of anxiety and stress overload webinar. And we will be sending out this recording over email to the registered participants in the next week. So keep an eye out for that in your inbox. And please feel free to contact us with any questions. You can follow CHYP on social media. We have a great Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube channel. You can also check out our website by visiting mychyp.org. And in terms of upcoming events, we do have a holiday workshop coming up for cookie decorating and cookie making for youth with chronic pain to join and socialize with peers and get in the holiday spirit. So if anyone is interested in registering for that, you can email me directly or our admin at mychyp.org email. Thank you again, Danielle and Dana. This was a great discussion and we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.